Hello, I'm delighted to be speaking to you today about a sculpture by the British artist Antony Gormley. He is a living sculptor who is still producing work today, and the piece that we're going to look at is called Untitled for Francis from 1985. Now, from about 1981, Gormley has been producing works based on his own body, and he comments that it's through the vessel of our own body that we understand and experience the world around us. That's what gives us a sense of perspective, our own size, our own mass, our own physicality. And it's my hope that in looking at this physical sculpture, we might better understand the crucifixion of Jesus and what that can mean for us. Now, the sculpture that we're looking at has a particularly interesting process of making, I think. Gormley's own body is the model for this. Quite literally, this is a cast of him naked. So he is stripped, his assistants wrap his body in cling film, followed by a layer of cloth, and then they cake plaster around the outside of that to create a mould, and Gormley stays within that as the plaster dries. Once the plaster is dry, it can be cut off, and in this instance it's cut off in 24 sections. Those 24 panels are then reinforced with fiberglass and coated in roofing lead, which is what gives the sculpture its sort of dull metallic quality. Once that has been done, the pieces are put back together again. The sculpture is reassembled, and you can see on this figure the marks of the soldering that has taken place in order to do that. So the process of making is very visible in the finished piece here. Now, the other thing that you will probably notice about this particular sculpture is that there are 5 holes in the body, 2 in the feet, 2 in the hands, and 1 in the breast or side, which looks rather like a spear wound. These are very much mirroring the crucifixion wounds of Jesus, aren't they? Now, those wounds might also recall the stigmata, which were reported to have been received by certain saints as a marker of their identification with Christ or their holiness. And St. Francis of Assisi was the first saint reported to have received those. So it's likely that in his title, Gormley is referencing St. Francis, untitled for Francis. And yet he does leave the main title of the sculpture as Untitled. And I think that's really significant. It's something that we will think about a little bit later. Though, of course, the other thing about those holes is that they are quite literally apertures that allow us to see inside the physical sculpture, into what is essentially a hollow, a cavity, which is the perfect index of Gormley's body. The outside of the sculpture is actually slightly larger than Gormley because of the thickness of the casing, but the inside is a perfect index, retaining the specificity of his facial features, for example, which have been lost on the outside of the sculpture. And that hollow, that cavity, I think is what really puts me in mind of what Jesus does for us in taking those nail wounds on the cross. He quite literally takes our place. He becomes an index of us. He takes on our sin, he takes on our punishment. And his presence on the cross stands for our absence from it. We are free of that punishment because he takes it. He takes our sin, he takes it to the grave, he takes it to hell, he gets rid of it. And he comes back resurrected, completely free of it. So there's also an absence of the sin that was present at the beginning. It is Jesus's fully human nature that allows him to be nailed to the cross, but it's his fully divine nature that keeps him there, that makes him choose to do that for us, and that allows him in his perfection to be able to take on our punishment and come back resurrected. Again, in the tomb where there should have been a dead body, there is the absence of one. There is a hollow, there is a cavity, there is an emptiness. The tomb is empty because Jesus has risen from the dead and he is free. And if we identify with him, if we give him our sin and we identify with him in his crucifixion, then we can also identify with him in his resurrection. Now, in his resurrection, Jesus is recognized by his disciples through his wounds. Jesus' resurrection body is one that comes to symbolize, I think, the relationship between his humanity and his divinity. It's a physical body, but it's a body that is able to come into locked rooms and disappear from them, much to the dismay of his disciples. Thomas, the disciple who doubted, wants to put his fingers in the wounds of Christ, because it is through those wounds that he will be able to identify Jesus. And so the wounds also become a marker of identity or identification. So in this sculpture, I think perhaps these aren't so much the wounds of St. Francis, but wounds that were taken for him. Jesus on the cross is quite literally stripped of his human dignity, and he is stripped of his divine identity. He is untitled. He takes on our identity. He's untitled for Francis, for Anthony Gormley, for me, and for you.